A pack could survive hunger, winter, even war, but it rarely survived a lie that became law. Once a council named one wolf unclean, every hand in the territory learned where to point, and every mouth learned what to repeat. Cordelia Ironhold had discovered that exile was not only distance from home, it was a public ritual, a slow stripping, a lesson for everyone still inside the circle. By the time the wagon chains rattled open at Silvermane Keep, she understood the cruel arithmetic. If she wanted her child born into a world with even one safe room, she would have to become smaller than fear and sharper than grief at the same time. Iron rings bit her wrists as two guards hauled her down from the transport platform. The mountain air smelled of wet pine and iron filings, a storm rolling somewhere beyond the ridgeline. Her dress had once been pack gray. Now it was threadbare at the hem and stretched over the curve of her belly, stained with old road dust and soap. A chain linked her cuffs to a waist loop, short enough that every step forced a slight bow. The message was deliberate. Servant, penal labor, owned. Head down, one guard said. Cordelia lowered her gaze to the black stones underfoot, each one polished by generations of boots and ceremony. Torches hissed in bronze brackets along the gate tunnel. Above them, carved wolves watched with open jaws and empty eyes. At the inner yard, a steward in dark blue waited with a wax tablet and a look of clinical disgust. Cordelia Ironhold, she read aloud, transferred under debt and moral censure, assigned to lower quarters and ritual sanitation. The second guard gave a short laugh. Moral censure. That is a pretty phrase for thief. Cordelia said nothing. Silence had kept her alive this long. The steward stepped closer, gaze dropping to Cordelia's stomach. You will not be touched unless ordered. You will not speak unless addressed. You will not contaminate ceremony spaces with personal superstition. If you collapse, you will be dragged aside and replaced. Then, softer, so only Cordelia heard. You should be grateful Silvermane purchased your labor instead of leaving you on the border road. Grateful. Cordelia tasted the word like grit between her teeth. I am not grateful. I am breathing. Those are not the same thing. By the second week of the harvest moon, she had learned the fortress by texture instead of map. The kitchen corridors were warm and damp, full of onion steam and ash. The barrack stairwells smelled of leather oil and old sweat. The ceremonial wing was cold enough that her knuckles stung even near the braziers, its bloodstone floors veined dark red, its walls inlaid with silver script invoking oath, bloodline, obedience. She slept on a pallet in former storage beside 6 other laborers who did not ask questions and did not offer names. On the day before Alpha Cain Silvermane's mating ceremony, she was marched into the great hall before dawn and handed a stiff bristle brush, 2 buckets, and a packet of powdered salt. Every sigil polished, the steward said. No residue. Cain wants the aisle clean enough to mirror the moon. Cordelia knelt on the bloodstone and set to work, shoulders aching by the first hour. Her hands were cracked at the joints. Lye found every cut and burned bright. She moved slowly along the spiral sigils etched into the aisle, rinsing, scrubbing, rinsing again. Guests from 2 allied packs were already arriving in the upper galleries. Their voices drifted down in clipped, amused threads. That is her? The disgraced one? Still carrying. I assume they would have sent her elsewhere. Cain has a talent for practical theater. Practical theater. She kept scrubbing. At the 4th sigil, she changed pressure. Barely visible, barely traceable unless someone knew moon ink chemistry. A complete cleansing would reactivate the lower binding runes under the stone, old conquest magic designed to lock witnesses in place during oath rites. She left a narrow crescent of residue in each knot, enough to interrupt the sequence when the circle was triggered. A fault line disguised as carelessness. Not rescue, not yet. just one compromised mechanism inside a house built on control. Near noon, bootsteps halted beside her. She looked up and found a common soldier watching from the edge of the aisle, uniform plain, no officer braid, dark hair tied at the nape. His stance was relaxed, but his attention was not. "You missed a stroke," he said quietly. Cordelia held his gaze for one beat too long, then dipped her head and corrected the wrong line on purpose, adding a neat pass where he pointed. He crouched, voice low enough to disappear under gallery chatter. "You did not miss it." She said nothing. His eyes were gray at first glance, then not gray at all when the torchlight caught them, as if amber lived beneath and waited. "Who taught you ritual script?" "No one who survived answering that question," she said. A corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile. "Fair." He rose as a lieutenant turned into the hall, expression shuddering into obedient blankness. "Keep moving," the lieutenant barked at Cordelia. To the soldier, "Wulfric, you are posted North Arch, not loitering over scrub labor." Wulfric Windrider gave a clean nod and stepped back without argument. But as he passed, his fingers tapped once against his wrist in a coded cadence old field units used for caution. "Watch tonight." She almost missed her footing then, not from the wet stone but from the shock of being seen. When it happened fast. Her brush snagged in a crack, water sloshed under her knee, and the world tilted. She started to go down hard on the edge of the sigil, chain yanking her wrists forward. A hand caught her elbow, another spread instinctively over the side of her belly, steady and protective in one impossible motion. Heat pulsed up her spine, fierce and silver bright. Her pulse stuttered, then slammed into a doubled rhythm that was not only hers. Storm rain, cedar bark, cold metal after lightning flooded her senses so abruptly, she drew a sharp breath and nearly lost balance again. Wulfric froze, as if struck. For one raw heartbeat, amber bled through his irises, ancient and wolf-deep. Then he released her and stepped back. "Careful," he said, voice roughened at the edges. "The stones are slick." He moved away before anyone could mark the moment. Cordelia stayed kneeling, trembling, one palm braced against the floor. What was that? What was that? I know what that was. No, no, I do not get to know that. Not here. By dusk, rehearsal began under full torchlight. Visiting alphas sat in carved balconies, while Kane's lieutenants rehearsed procession order down the bloodstone aisle she had spent the day polishing. Cordelia and 3 laborers were ordered to stand by with cloths and water, invisible until needed. One lieutenant deliberately tipped a cup of dark wine across the first sigil and pointed at her with lazy contempt. "Clean it, on your knees. Use your sleeves." Laughter scattered from the dais. Cordelia knelt and pressed cloth into the stain. Wine bled like ink across her wrists. Another lieutenant circled behind her and clicked his tongue. "Careful with the air, little scavenger. We would not want you to claim injury when work is due." The words were light. The cruelty was practiced. Wulfric crossed the hall from his post before she could answer. "My error," he said to the dais. "I placed her at the wrong station. Punish the supervising guard." Kane Silvermane watched from the central platform, broad-shouldered in formal black, silver torque at his throat, expression carved from confidence and boredom. "You accept fault for servant incompetence, Windrider?" "I accept command responsibility," Wulfric said. A murmur moved through the galleries. Kane descended one step, predatory interest sharpening his face. "Then kneel." Wulfric knelt without hesitation. Kane lifted a braided switch from the rail and struck it once across Wulfric's back. Ceremonial punishment, meant more as humiliation than injury under so many witnesses. Cordelia's throat tightened. Kane dropped the switch and looked past him to her. "And the servant learns consequences too." He started down the second step. Wulfric rose and placed himself between them with lethal calm. Ancient soldier's protection, Wulfric said clearly, projecting to every balcony. A laborer under direct guard assignment cannot be punished by outside command without formal breach hearing. You sign that code at Winter Council, Alpha Kane. Silence snapped tight across the hall. Kane's jaw shifted. He knew every visiting pack leader knew it too. Finally, he smiled without warmth. So I did. He turned back to the dais and spoke louder. Rehearsal alteration. At moonrise tomorrow, this laborer will stand as sacrificial witness to cleanse the ceremony of prior corruption claims. Record it. The record keeper scratched the decree onto wax. Sacrificial witness. Legal language wrapped around execution intent. The room inhaled and exhaled as one body, relieved it was not them. 3 nights later would have been too late. By then, the decree would be sealed, witnessed, untouchable. That night, while the keep settled and rain began to tick against the high windows, Cordelia stole into the council corridor with a bucket and cloth as cover. She had noticed, while scrubbing, that the outer archive shelf never locked fully if the lower hinge swelled in damp weather. It took 2 breaths and a steady hand to slip a thin cleaning blade into the seam and lift. Inside, account tablets lay stacked in cedar trays, clay impressed with transfer marks and seal cuts. She found the sequence she had memorized from glimpses during floor duty. Debt reassignment, transport purchase, discretionary right expenditure. Names, numbers, dates that connected her exile hearing to Kane's treasury movements with terrible elegance. She wrapped 3 tablets in linen and tied them under her apron against her hip. Then she ran. The lower passages smelled of wet stone and tallow smoke. Her chain had been removed at evening lockup, but exhaustion dragged at her legs and each turn looked like the last. She kept one hand under her belly as she moved, not from fragility, but from instinct. Guiding, guarding, promising. Left at the split where the wall sweated mineral salt, down the narrow stair with the cracked 4th tread. Past the old grain vault door hanging open on one hinge. If I stay, I disappear in their ritual words. If I run, I may still vanish. Run anyway. Boots struck stone somewhere behind her, voices clipped and urgent. Check the lower tunnels. She pushed through a half-rotted service door into the storm-dark outer passage, where mountain wind slammed rain in sheets across the steps. Lightning flashed over the inner yard, silvering the parapets. Cordelia stumbled on slick moss, caught herself on the wall, and kept moving toward the tunnel mouth below the north tower. The one route she had mapped that might lead beyond the keep before dawn. A horn sounded from the north wall, low and urgent, and torchlight flared along the battlements behind her. Cordelia ducked her head against the rain and plunged down the slick steps toward the tunnel mouth, breath tearing in her throat. Water ran in ribbons over the stone, turning every foothold into a gamble. The tablets bound against her hip felt suddenly heavy, as if Kane's accounts were made of iron instead of clay. The tunnel opened like a wound in the mountain, narrow at first, then widening into a passage carved long before Silvermane banners flew over this keep. Old boundary marks lined the walls, moon runes half erased by centuries of damp. She knew enough ritual law to understand what that meant. This was not merely a drainage route. It was a border throat between territories, built when kings still feared ambush from their own kin. Behind her, boots hammered the stair. A voice carried above the storm. She went north. Move. Cordelia forced her body forward. Her lower back pulsed with pain from the run, and a sharp cramp seized, then faded. She pressed her palm under her belly until the tension eased, whispering through clenched teeth. Stay with me. Just a little farther. The darkness swallowed sound oddly in that stone throat, turning pursuit into echoes she could not place. Twice she took the wrong fork and doubled back, guided only by the memory of a map she had built from stolen glances and labor routes. Right at the collapsed pillar. left where the ceiling dipped low enough to scrape her shoulder. Straight through the old iron grate bent open by rust and time. The air changed first. Less smoke, more pine and wet earth. Then the tunnel spilled onto a narrow ledge above a ravine, wind slamming into her hard enough to stagger her sideways. Below, black trees shifted under rain. Across the ravine, on a higher ridge, watchfires burned in a line too orderly for chance. She had reached the edge of Silvermane land. A shadow moved at the far end of the ledge, then another. 4 figures stepped from behind a stack of weathered stone blocks, cloaks dark with rain, spears lowered in a disciplined arc that blocked the only path onward. "Stop there," the front guard called. Cordelia froze. The men were not dressed like Kane's Keep soldiers. Their leather was plain but better cut, marked at the shoulder with a stitched emblem she did not recognize in the lightning. A crescent over crossed wind lines. Border wardens. Not hers, not Kane's, and not inclined to welcome a hunted woman in servant gray with mud to her knees and terror in her face. "I am unarmed," she said, raising both hands slowly. "I need passage." The guard's gaze dropped to her belly, then lifted to the blood and grime on her sleeves. "You need a physician, not passage. Name your pack." She hesitated one beat too long. "Name," he repeated, sharper now. Cordelia drew breath. Cordelia Ironhold. Exiled. That shifted the men in a subtle ripple. Not pity, not contempt. Something calculating. Exile made everyone cautious. Exiles carried trouble like burrs in fur. "From which territory?" the guard asked. "East Ridge, formerly under Ironhold Council." Her voice roughened. "Transferred to Silvermane Keep under debt censure." "Debt censure with no escort and half the fortress behind you?" Skepticism edged every word. "Try again." She fumbled under her apron and pulled one wrapped tablet free, holding it out with shaking fingers. "I have proof of forged accounts tied to Alpha Kane. If I go back, I die before dawn. If I stay here, you can bind me and hand me over at daylight, but at least read this first." One of the rear guards stepped closer, then stopped as a new set of footfalls approached from the tunnel behind her, measured, unhurried, utterly out of rhythm with the panic of pursuit. Cordelia turned before she could stop herself. Wulfric emerged into the rain with his hood down, hair plastered to his temples, a cut across his cheek already healing. He was alone. No hounds, no squad. The border men straightened as one, spear tips rising a fraction. Not at him. For him. "Hold position," the front guard said, but his tone had changed, deference slipping through command. "Sir, this laborer crossed from Silvermane's side carrying contraband tablets, claims asylum and treasury fraud." Wulfric's eyes found Cordelia first, not the tablets, not the guards, her. That same storm and cedar scent crashed over her senses, and the low thrum in her chest answered before she could force it quiet. "She is under my protection," he said. The front guard frowned. "Protocol requires—" "Under my protection," Wulfric repeated, and this time the words landed with old authority, worn thin by disguise but unmistakable. Lightning split the sky. In that white flash, Cordelia saw it clearly, the border men's posture, the insignia at Wulfric's wrist she had taken for stitched thread, but now recognized as hammered silver rank, the instant silence that followed him like law. Her pulse kicked hard. The soldier mask had not just cracked. It had never been the whole truth. A second horn sounded behind them, farther away now but closing along the wall road. The front guard looked from Wulfric to the tunnel mouth and made a decision. "Bring her across the marker, now." Wulfric stepped toward Cordelia and extended his hand, palm up, waiting for consent even with danger bearing down on all sides. Rain streamed off his sleeve. His face was unreadable except for the strain at his jaw. "Cross with me," he said quietly. Once you pass that stone, Cain's men cannot claim you without treaty challenge. 2 breaths. 3. The wind clawed at her dress. She placed her hand in his. The moment her boot cleared the carved boundary marker, warmth flared up her arm where their skin met, bright and fierce enough to steal her breath. Wulfric drew in a sharp inhale and shut his eyes for an instant, like a man taking a blade without flinching. When he looked at her again, amber had bled into his irises, predator and protector sharing the same gaze. By the time the storm rolled into deepest night, they had taken shelter in an old watch chapel cut into the mountain above the ravine, its altar stone worn smooth by generations of oath-keepers. A single brazier burned near the wall, throwing copper light across carved moon phases and chipped prayer marks. One of the border women had brought broth and dry wool, then withdrew at Wulfric's quiet request, leaving them alone with rain drumming the roof and everything neither of them could postpone any longer. Cordelia sat on a bench near the fire, wrists wrapped fresh, tablets stacked beside her like a second heartbeat. Her wet hair clung to her neck. Every muscle trembled now that running had stopped. Wulfric stood opposite her, cloak discarded, shirt dark at the shoulders from rain. Without the keep's dim hierarchy around him, he seemed taller, not in body, but in gravity, as if the room itself had adjusted to his presence. She broke the silence first. "Who are you when no one is watching?" His mouth tightened. "Wulfric Windrider." "That is not all." "No." He held her gaze. "It is not." She laughed once, brittle and disbelieving. "I scrubbed your enemy's floor while an Alpha King patrolled in a common soldier's cloak, and I am meant to believe that is strategy, not another man's appetite for control." A flicker of pain crossed his face, gone almost immediately. "You are not meant to believe anything on command. Ask what you need." "What I need?" The words came sharper than intended. "I need to know if this pull between us is real, or if you can force it. I need to know whether my child is safer with you than alone in the dark. I need to know why you let me kneel in that hall for weeks, if you had power enough to stop it." He took one step closer, then stopped, leaving space between them wide enough to breathe. "Because I could not expose my position before I had proof of Cain's right network and council buyers. Because if I moved too early, he would have disappeared your records and buried you with them. Because every day I waited cost you, and I will carry that." His voice dropped. "And because what hit us on that floor was not force." The low thrum in her chest intensified, answering his nearness in involuntary waves. Heat pulsed along her spine, then down into her palms. The room seemed suddenly too small for her skin. She curled her fingers around the edge of the bench and stared at the brazier so she would not drown in the scent of rain and cedar and male wolf and home she had never been given. "I am so tired of choosing between dangers that wear different faces. I am so tired of reading rooms for exits before I read them for mercy." He says bond, and my body reaches for the word like thirst, but thirst has nearly killed me before. If this is instinct, it might save me. If this is hunger, it might ruin me. I cannot afford ruin. Not now. Not with a life inside me counting on every choice I make. I need facts. I need law. I need a reason stronger than longing, because longing is how women like me get carried to altars we never agreed to. She lifted her head. "Say it plainly." His answer came without flourish. "You are my fated mate." The brazier cracked, a log settling into flame. Cordelia felt the doubled rhythm again, not metaphor, not hope, a literal syncopation under her ribs, as if another pulse had threaded through hers and refused to leave. Wulfric pressed his hand to his own sternum with a stunned, almost angry wonder, then looked at her like he was afraid to blink and lose sight of something sacred. "This should not have happened like this," he said. "Not in chains, not in fear." "No," she whispered. "It should not." He moved closer by inches, each one deliberate and crouched in front of her so their eyes aligned. "May I touch your hand?" She nodded. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. A current raced through her arm, up her neck, down her spine in a bright cascade that made her gasp. Wulfric's pupils shifted, the predator surfacing, and his breath caught hard in his throat. Amber burned more vividly through his gaze, not theatrical, not a threat, simply truth stripped of concealment. Outside, voices rose briefly at the corridor entrance, then faded as patrols changed. 3 days remained until moonrise ceremony, and the mountain seemed to know it, holding every sound taut. Cordelia should have pulled away. Every lesson carved into her said distance was safety. Instead, she leaned forward without thinking, drawn by a pull older than fear, and the space between them narrowed to shared breath. "Look at me," he said, voice rough with restraint. She did. Their eyes locked, and the bond recognized itself with terrifying clarity. Cordelia felt the pull like a tide turning under stone, relentless and ancient, urging closeness, trust, surrender to a certainty her mind had no language for. Wulfric's grip tightened once around her hand, then loosened. He drew a breath through his teeth, every muscle in his jaw hard with restraint, and released her completely. He rose and stepped back until the firelight no longer touched his boots. "I will not take advantage of this," he said, voice low but unwavering. "Not tonight. Not ever." The words landed harder than a command. In every place she had been powerless. Men with rank treated proximity as permission. Here, in a mountain chapel with rain on the roof and no witness except old carved moons, he chose distance when the bond was demanding the opposite. Cordelia sat very still, fingers curled around her own palm where his warmth had lingered. Wulfric turned toward the brazier, poured clean water from a sealed skin into a basin, then set bread, cheese, and broth on the altar edge as if laying out offerings. He did not reach for her again. He waited. "If you want me by the door, I stay by the door," he said. "If you want me outside, I go outside. If you want silence, you have silence. But you need to drink, and your wrists need treatment. Those are not negotiations with pride." Cordelia stared at him, searching for the hidden hook in his kindness. She found only exhaustion, guarded tenderness, and a discipline honed so deep it looked like pain. "Why?" she asked. "Why does restraint look harder for you than fighting?" He gave a short, humorless breath. "Because fighting is simple. You strike what threatens. This is not simple. You have every reason to fear what I am. If I touch you without your full consent, I become another prison wearing a different crest." The answer split through her defenses more effectively than any oath. "Trust is a luxury I have not had. Trust is how you get named guilty in rooms where the verdict is written before you enter. I am tired down to the bone, and still I count exits, hands, tone, distance to the nearest blade. He says mate, and my body answers with that fierce double rhythm. My body has been right about danger more often than any counsel. Could it be right about safety too? If I take one step toward him, I am not surrendering law or caution. I am testing truth in the only way left to me. One choice, then another. I can stop at any point. I can say no and still be worthy of protection. If he means what he says, no will stand. If no stands, maybe this is not a trap." She lifted the basin with both hands, drank, and passed it back. "You may treat my wrists," she said, the words careful and formal. "Only that." He nodded once, like a man receiving a sacred charge, and crouched at arm's length. The cloth bindings came undone with patient fingers. Lie burns crossed her skin in thin, angry lines, and the iron bruises at her wrists had gone plum dark. Wulfric dipped a clean strip in warm water, wrung it out, and paused. "This will sting," he said. "It already stings." A corner of his mouth moved, brief and real. Fair. He worked with infuriating gentleness, dabbing salve into cracked skin, wrapping each wrist in fresh linen without pulling too tight. When her left hand trembled hard enough to make the cloth slip, he did not remark on it. He simply steadied the bandage against his own palm until the shaking passed. After a long, quiet moment, he looked, not at her face, but at the curve of her belly under the borrowed wool blanket. His expression changed, some stern line in him softening into reverence so unguarded it made Cordelia's throat ache. "Little one," he said quietly, speaking to the child as if introductions mattered. "I am late. I should have found you sooner. I cannot undo that. I can stand now." His hand hovered in the space between them. "May I?" Cordelia swallowed. "Yes." He rested his palm lightly against the side of her belly where he had caught her in the hall, protective by instinct, no possessive claim in the touch. His eyes closed for one breath. "By moon law and crown law," he murmured, "I swear no right will be laid on you, no hand will use you, no fear will be your first inheritance." The chapel held stillness like held breath. Rain softened to a steady whisper outside. Cordelia turned away quickly, blinking hard against an emotion that felt too large and too dangerous. She had learned to survive by reducing need to function, hope to strategy, grief to a private task done in the dark. His vow tugged at all the numb places at once. When she finally spoke, her voice was rough. "You swear like a king." Wulfric opened his eyes. "I swear like a soldier who buried too many wolves because kings lied." He stood then, crossed to the door, and settled on the stone threshold with his back to the frame, a drawn blade resting unsheathed across his knees. He did not watch her sleep. He watched the corridor. By first light, the storm had thinned to mist that clung to the ravine like breath against glass. A border warden brought hot water and a fresh cloak, then withdrew under Wulfric's curt thanks. Cordelia ate half a heel of bread, kept the tablets wrapped tight, and followed him out of the chapel into the upper watch path where dawn painted the mountains in bands of slate and pale silver. Her legs shook from fatigue, but the cramping had eased, and the child shifted once, a firm, reassuring pressure low in her abdomen. They reached the gatehouse before sunup proper, a squat stone hold perched over the treaty marker with arrow slits, and a central hall used for border hearings. 6 wardens stood watch. 2 recognized Wulfric on sight and bowed. The others exchanged quick glances and copied them a heartbeat later. A broad-shouldered captain with braided black hair strode from the records table, face set in wary irritation. "My lord," she said, inclining her head to Wulfric, then flicking a hard look toward Cordelia. "You brought a Silvermane penal laborer into Windrider jurisdiction without review. That is a diplomatic fire waiting for dry timber." "Then we handle it lawfully," Wulfric said. "Prepare witness registry. She files under crown protection." The captain's mouth flattened. "With respect, she is heavily compromised, exiled, accused thief, carrying child from disputed parentage, and in possession of stolen financial tablets. If this is a trap, you are walking straight into it." Cordelia felt the old humiliation rise fast and acid. Disputed parentage, compromised. The language changed. The blade stayed the same. She stepped forward and unwrapped one tablet onto the records table with both hands so no one could claim sleight of hand. "Read the seal cuts," she said. "Cross-check transport purchase orders against discretionary right expenditure. Kane paid for my transfer 2 days before my hearing concluded. The verdict followed his payment. I was not judged. I was procured." The captain did not touch the tablet. "And if these are altered?" "They are not. Every guilty wolf says that." Wulfric moved then, not quickly, not theatrically, but with authority that altered the room's geometry. He placed himself at Cordelia's shoulder, close enough that she felt his presence as a shield, far enough to keep her unboxed. "Captain Isra," he said, each word precise, You will address her as witness, not cargo. You will not question her child. You will not repeat Silvermane's slander in my hall. Ezra held his gaze for 2 taut seconds. My duty is to your safety. And mine is to law, he said. The law Cain is gutting. If your caution becomes contempt, you are not protecting me. You are serving him by habit. Silence rippled outward. One warden looked down at his boots. Another shifted, ashamed. Ezra exhaled through her nose and bowed her head, this time deeper. Understood. Wulfric nodded once. Good. Begin verification now. Summon archive clerk Torin and seal witness logs with triple mark. No private handling, no closed room review. Orders snapped into motion. Torin, a thin older clerk with ink-stained fingertips, hurried in, blinking sleep from his eyes. Under 2 guards in Cordelia's direct watch, he inspected each clay tablet, called out seal patterns, and checked transfer notches against a bound ledger pulled from the gatehouse coffer. His face drained of color as the sequence aligned. These are genuine, he said quietly, then louder for the record. Payments from Silvermane Treasury to East Ridge Tribunal intermediaries, indexed before legal condemnation date. Additional disbursement to transport broker. Final transfer tagged Moonblood preparatory expense. The hall went still enough to hear the brazier pop. Ezra turned slowly to Cordelia. The skepticism in her expression did not vanish, but it fractured around something harder to dismiss. You carried this through a storm with hunters behind you. Yes. Why not sell it to rivals and disappear? Cordelia met her eyes. Because disappearing is what Cain planned. I am done helping men bury me. Wulfric's hand hovered near Cordelia's back, not touching, a question waiting. She leaned a fraction toward him, barely visible to anyone else. His fingers settled against the wool at her shoulder blade, steady and warm. A runner burst in from the south stair, breathless. Silvermane envoy at outer marker. They demand return of escaped labor and stolen state property under treaty reclamation. Ezra swore softly under her breath. That was fast. Wulfric did not look away from Cordelia. You decide, he said quietly. If you want to remain unseen, I deny entry and move you to inner quarters. If you want this public now, we answer in hall. The choice struck her with startling force. Not what should happen to her. What she wanted to happen. Agency felt unfamiliar in her own mouth. Cordelia straightened, one hand braced under her belly, the other resting over the wrapped tablets. We answer in hall, she said, openly, with record witness. Wulfric's expression warmed with fierce approval. Then openly. He turned to Isra. Seat the envoy, full protocol. Let them hear every line. The meeting that followed was short, ugly, and decisive. Cain's envoy, perfumed and polished, demanded immediate transfer with rehearsed outrage. Torin read the verified ledger entries aloud in a clear, shaking voice. Cordelia gave her name, status, and testimony without lowering her gaze once. Wulfric cited border law, crown law, and moon law precedents in a cadence that left no space for interruption. By the time the envoy stormed out threatening council retaliation, the witness log carried 9 signatures and 3 jurisdiction seals. When the doors closed, the hall exhaled. Isra approached Cordelia and offered a formal salute, fist to heart. Witness Cordelia Ironhold, she said. My earlier words were unjust. They will not be repeated under this command. Cordelia nodded, unsure what to do with apology that came without performance. Wulfric stepped beside her, close enough that the bond's low rhythm steadied in her chest. You held the line, he said quietly. So did you. He angled his head, studying her face with that same careful attention he gave battle terrain. Are you still afraid of me? The honest answer rose before caution could sand it down. Yes, she said, but not in the old way. Something like relief moved through him. Cordelia looked at his hand, at the space between them. at the hall full of witnesses who now knew Cain's lie could bleed. Then she reached and laced her fingers through his of her own accord, deliberate, public, and unhidden. "I am not ready for blind trust," she said, voice low and steady. "I am ready for earned trust. Keep earning it." Wulfric closed his hand around hers as if accepting a crown far heavier than metal. "I will." And for the first time since the chains closed at Silvermane Keep, lowering her guard felt less like surrender and more like choosing where to stand. The doors at the far end of the gatehouse slammed open hard enough to rattle the iron latch rings. A warden staggered in, rain-soaked and breathing fast, dragging a cloaked man by the collar. The prisoner fought once, then went still when Isra put a blade under his chin. "Caught at the ash pit," the warden said, "burning papers with Silvermane's seal wax." Isra stripped the wet bundle from the man's hands and dropped it on the records table. Half-charred sheets slid free, ink blurred at the edges but legible in the center. Torin leaned in, lips moving silently as he traced the lines. His face went gray. "My lord," he said, looking to Wulfric, "this is Cain's private directive ledger. Not treasury script, right script." Wulfric released Cordelia's hand only long enough to pull the top sheet closer. His expression did not break, but the room chilled around him. Cordelia stepped beside him and read. Item 1. Acceleration of public mating ceremony to secure coalition oaths. Item 2. Containment of false claimant testimony through sacrificial witness clause. Item 3. In narrow coded hand she recognized from the council floor inventory logs. Moonblood extraction from air-bearing witness to divert succession resonance from crown line. Her pulse struck hard once, then steadied into that doubled rhythm she now knew too well. "Cain does not just want a bride and 3 territories," she said, voice low. "He wants the right to call his line divinely sanctioned. If he stages this right publicly enough, half the packs will treat it as truth even if the law says otherwise." Torin swallowed. "There is more." He names his ritual officiant, Elder Maven of the High Council. Isra cursed under her breath. Maven signed treaty adjudications for 12 years. If she blesses his ceremony, every border captain from here to the river will hesitate to challenge him. Wulfric's jaw tightened. Not if Maven is exposed as complicit. The prisoner spat at the floor. "Expose what you like. By moonrise tomorrow, Cain will have vows, witnesses, and a council elder at his right hand. Your hidden crown means nothing if he controls the right." Isra hit him once in the sternum with the hilt of her blade, sharp and controlled, enough to cut off the sneer. "You will speak when asked." Cordelia kept reading, forcing herself through the encoded phrasing. Cain had threaded his scheme through law, ritual, and spectacle with predatory precision. He had arranged her exile by forged accounts, purchased her labor transfer before her hearing concluded, positioned her as disposable witness inside a ceremony hall layered with conquest runes. And now, when exposure threatened him, he intended to recast her death as purification and call it tradition. Dangerous men were common. Dangerous men who understood paperwork, witness hierarchy, and sacred language were rare. Wulfric looked at the last page and went utterly still. For one brief, unguarded second, the narration of the room shifted through him rather than around him. Old betrayal rose behind his ribs like a remembered blade. The winter council chamber, a ring of oath-bound leaders smiling while they signed terms already sold to Cain. The strategic necessity of disappearing into a soldier's cloak because a visible king could be trapped more easily than an unseen one. He had chosen concealment to survive long enough to cut out corruption at the root. He had not expected to find his mate in the middle of the snare. When he spoke again, his voice was iron. "Chain this courier separately, no contact. Torin, copy every surviving line. Isra, double inner sentries and seal the archive room with 2 captains present. Cordelia stays within my command perimeter." The prisoner laughed, breathless and ugly. Keep her close if you want. Kane already set the hook. A second runner entered, this one holding a black lacquered tube marked with Silvermane crest and council knotwork. Formal dispatch at outer marker, she said. Delivered under white cord. Isra cracked the seal and read aloud. By provisional authority of Council Elder Maven, witness Cordelia Ironhold is summoned to Silvermane Keep at moonrise tomorrow for corrective right testimony under sacrificial clause. Failure to appear constitutes admission of fraud and treasonous fabrication. Escorting authority must present all seized financial tablets for adjudication. The runner shifted uneasily. There is a postscript, Captain. Isra read that too, her mouth flattening with each word. Any interference will be treated as an act of war against council process. Torin let out a thin sound. He is using the council seal as a weapon. He is using timing, Cordelia said. He moved the ceremony forward because he knows our evidence chain is fresh and fragile. He wants us scrambling while he controls the stage. By late afternoon, mist had burned off the ravine and the gatehouse war room smelled of hot wax, damp wool, and steel. Maps covered the central table. 3 options had been drawn and crossed out in dark ink. Hide Cordelia and hold evidence until wider coalition review. Too slow, and Kane would secure vows unopposed. Send a strike team to seize Maven before moonrise. Non-trivial chance of civil fracture if it failed. Answer the summons with full witness convoy, lawful, public, and dangerously exposed. Wulfric stood at the table's edge, sleeves rolled, forearms marked with faint gold runes now visible in lamplight. He spoke with clipped precision, assigning routes, fallback points, oath witnesses, and archive duplicates. He was not the quiet soldier who had knelt on wine-slick stone 3 nights earlier. He was the axis the room turned around, and every order carried the weight of a crown he had hidden for too long. Cordelia watched him while pretending to study map pins. I am standing in a room where men debate my life as if it is strategy and precedent, yet this time one of them keeps turning to ask what I want. I am still afraid. Fear sits in my throat, in my shoulders, in every old bruised memory left behind. But alongside it there is this other thing, steady and fierce, this recognition that I am no longer only the hunted one. He does not erase my terror. He meets it without asking me to pretend. I can want him and still demand law. I can feel the bond pull me close and still require proof with every step. This is what earned trust looks like, I think. Not a vow spoken once, 100 small choices under pressure. A hand offered palm up, a door left unbarred. My name spoken like it belongs in the record, not the ash pit. Wulfric finished issuing orders and came to her side as the room thinned. You have not sat down in 2 hours. I can sit when Kane is caged. That answer sounds like me, he said, and for a moment a dry warmth touched his voice. A troubling influence. The brief humor broke the tension just enough that she almost smiled. Almost. His gaze dropped to her bandaged wrists, then returned to her face. Any cramping? Not now. Dizziness? Only when captains argue in circles. That earned a real, quiet breath from him, half laugh, half relief. Then he sobered. If we go openly, Kane will try to separate you from the evidence chain. He will bait me into force so he can name me Oathbreaker before witnesses. Then do not give him force, she said. Give him law, and let him choke on it. Their eyes held. The bond throbbed low and insistent, not demanding, simply present, like a second pulse in the room. Wulfric lifted his hand, hesitated, and waited. She nodded once. He touched 2 fingers to the inside of her wrist, right above the linen wrap, a grounding point more than a caress. Warmth spread through her arm and settled the last of the tremor she had been hiding since the courier's papers hit the table. The door opened again. A junior warden entered with rigid posture. My lord, two of Kane's lieutenants request immediate audience under White Banner custom. They claim they carry revised tribunal terms from Elder Maven. Isra, now at the threshold, shook her head. Too convenient. Wulfric withdrew his hand. Search them. Strip weapons at outer room. They speak where everyone can hear. The lieutenants were ushered in minutes later, polished armor, respectful bows, empty hands displayed. Cordelia recognized one from rehearsal night, the man who had laughed while wine spread at her knees. His smile now was smooth and diplomatic. Alpha Regent, he said to Wulfric, carefully not using king. Witness Cordelia, we come in good faith. Isra folded her arms. State terms. The lieutenant produced a folded parchment. Elder Maven offers procedural compromise. Bring witness and tablets to Silvermane at dusk rather than moonrise. In return, no sacrificial clause enforcement pending evidentiary review. Cordelia reached for the parchment before anyone else could. The seal looked right. The wording did not. Too polished in places where Maven wrote bluntly. A copied hand. This is forged, she said. The lieutenant's smile did not move. You are in no position to certify council script. Torrin stepped forward, peered at the line's spacing, and blanched. She is right. Maven leaves a hook cut at every sentence break. This scribe does not. Everything happened in one breath after that. The second lieutenant snapped his wrist. Powder burst from his sleeve into the brazier, and the room filled with thick gray smoke that burned eyes and throat. Steel rang. Someone shouted for the doors. Another body slammed into the map table, scattering pins across stone. Cordelia dropped low, one hand over her mouth, the other braced under her belly, and crawled toward the wall where she had seen a ventilation slit earlier. A gloved hand caught her ankle and yanked. She twisted, kicked hard, and heard a grunt as her heel connected with shin. Take the tablets, a voice barked through smoke. Not her. The evidence. She rolled toward the records desk, fingers closing around the wrapped clay bundle by touch. Shapes lunged in and out of the haze, wardens grappling with disguised attackers who had not come as 2 diplomats but at least 6, hidden in servant cloaks near the corridor and waiting for the signal. Wulfric's command cut through the chaos like a blade. Cordelia, left wall, now. She moved, half blind, until a strong arm found her shoulders and turned her into a narrow side passage. Wulfric's body blocked the doorway as he fought, controlled and brutal in economy, driving one attacker back with an elbow strike, disarming another with a wrist break, and a shove that sent him skidding across wet stone. Amber had flooded his gaze fully now, something ancient looking out through human features. Isra appeared at Cordelia's side, coughing hard, blood at the corner of her lip from a split she ignored. Can you run? Yes. Then run. They made it 6 strides before a crossbow bolt struck the passage frame inches ahead, quivering in oak. Another thudded into the wall behind them. Attackers had taken the upper gallery too. Wulfric slammed the side door and dropped the iron bar into place. Service stair, he said. Move. They descended into the lower archive corridor while smoke seeped under the upper doors. Torrin stumbled after them, clutching a ledger chest, face ashen but determined. 2 wardens flanked the rear, blades drawn. At the archive vault, Isra spun the wheel lock and shoved Cordelia inside. Stay behind the pillar. Cordelia set the tablets on a stone shelf and forced herself to think through the ringing in her ears. Count assets, count exits, count what matters. 3 original tablets were no longer 3. She stared at the bundle, unwrapped it, and felt her stomach drop. 1 tablet remained. The other 2 had been switched in the smoke for blank clay duplicates scored to match weight. Torrin made a broken sound. No. Wulfric reached for the surviving piece, eyes scanning the inscription. This is the transport order. It proves purchase, not the moon bloodline item. From outside the vault, pounding hit the outer archive door in heavy, measured blows, not frantic, methodical. Then a voice carried through the stone, amplified by corridor acoustics and cruelly calm. Cain Silvermane sends terms. It called. Deliver Cordelia Ironhold to Silvermane Keep by moonrise, and Captain Ezra alive is returned. Refuse, and her command dies one by one before dawn. Choose quickly. Cordelia looked at Wulfric, breath shallow, fingers already closing around the one tablet left, and knew the night had tipped from precarious to critical. Wulfric read the inscription again, then handed it to Torin. Seal this in the witness chest. Torin's hands shook. If we open the door, they kill us in the corridor. If we do not open it, they burn the archive and call it resistance, Wulfric said. Cain wants panic. He gets procedure. The pounding stopped. In the silence that followed, Cordelia heard distant boots shifting in formation outside the vault and the faint scrape of someone dragging metal across stone. Barricade spikes. They were sealing exits. A second voice called through the door, smoother than the first. You have 1/4 hour. Send out Cordelia Ironhold and receive Captain Ezra breathing. Refuse, and we send back pieces of command. Torin went pale to the lips. One of the wardens made a strangled sound of fury and slammed a fist into the pillar. Wulfric did not move, but his gaze sharpened into something lethal and utterly focused. Open the vent shaft, he said. Now. The rear warden pried at a rusted grate near the floor and hauled it free. Cool air rushed in, carrying smoke and rain and the sharper scent of blood from somewhere up the passage. Not much. Not fatal. Yet. Cordelia crouched beside the ledger chest, mind racing through law, roots, timing, and the shape of Cain's ego. He did not want her dead in a hidden corridor. He wanted her erased inside ritual language, while every allied pack watched him look righteous. They took the 2 tablets because he does not need them destroyed, she said. He needs them controlled. If we go dark, he still claims fraud. If we appear publicly, he must answer in front of witnesses. Wulfric turned to her. I can move you through the lower culvert and get you beyond the ridge by dawn. He will keep hunting. He will keep rewriting. Alive gives us options. Alive and silent gives him victory. He stepped closer, voice low. Do not ask me to place you back in his reach. I am not asking, she said. I am deciding. The bond between them tightened, not as command, but as a fierce current of alarm and recognition that she felt in her bones. Wulfric's jaw flexed. Every instinct in him wanted to put her behind walls and steel. Every oath in him required he honor her choice. From the corridor came a hoarse shout, then a thud. Ezra, trying to answer through a gag. Cordelia closed her eyes for one measured breath. I am done waiting for men to pick my fate and call it mercy. I am done being evidence carried from room to room while councils debate whether I count. I know what Cain fears, not my death. My voice under moonlight where rank cannot interrupt. I am scared, yes. I feel it in my hands, in the tight pull low in my back, in every memory that says public circles are where women like me disappear. But fear is not a verdict. I choose the circle. I choose witnesses. I choose to stand where he cannot bury me without burying himself. If I fall tonight, it will not be as cargo. It will be as claimant. My child will know that much of me, whatever comes next. She opened her eyes. We go to Silvermane Keep under white banner demand, full witness convoy. Torin with certified copies, the surviving tablet, the burned directive pages from the ash pit, and the prisoner courier. Torin blinked. You want him brought too? I want Cain hearing his own chain of orders read by the man who tried to burn them. Wulfric held her gaze for a long, taut second, then nodded once. So ordered. He gave commands in a rapid cadence. Rear vent passage, 2 squad wedge, shields locked, no pursuit brakes. They moved through the shaft one by one, crawling on elbows through wet stone until the tunnel opened behind the old cistern wall. A brief clash followed in the service corridor, fast and disorienting. Steel ringing, shouted names, boots skidding on water. Wulfric fought at the front with cold economy, creating space, never leaving her unguarded for more than a heartbeat. They retrieved Isra at the stair landing, wrists bound, lips split, eyes blazing with fury. She spat out her gag and said, "I am filing complaint about your timing," before taking a spare blade and rejoining formation. By the time moonrise silvered the highest parapet, their convoy crossed back through the north gate of Silvermane Keep under formal challenge bells. The great hall blazed with torchlight and gathered power. Allied pack leaders lined the balconies in fur and iron, their scents layered thick over wine, smoke, and rain-damp stone. Cain stood on the central dais in ceremonial black, silver torque gleaming, with Elder Maven at his right in council white. Musicians had stopped mid-phrase when the doors opened. The silence landed heavy. Cain smiled as Cordelia entered in servant gray between Wulfric and Isra, belly visible, shoulders squared. "You return exactly as summoned," he said, voice carrying. "How obedient." Wulfric did not bow. Witness convoy under moon law, trial by public record. Murmurs scattered through the galleries. Cain's gaze flicked to Torrin, to the bound courier, to the sealed chest in a warden's hands. For the first time, irritation touched his composure. Maven lifted her staff. "This hall is assembled for a mating rite, not legal theater." Cordelia stepped forward before Wulfric could answer. "Then deny me and do it loudly, Elder, so every pack can note that moon law protects only men with crowns." That landed. Heads turned. One balcony Alpha barked, "Let her speak." Another followed. "Trial by moon witness is older than your staff, Maven." Cain's smile thinned. "You speak of old law? You were brought here in chains." "Yes," Cordelia said, "and your treasury paid for those chains before my hearing was finished." She extended her hand. Torrin placed the surviving tablet in her palm. She held it high enough for the nearest balconies to see the seal cuts. "Read it," she said. Maven hesitated. Cain said, too quickly, "Forgery." Torrin took one step into the aisle, voice shaking but clear. "Transport order, authorized by Silvermane Treasury, dated 2 days before East Ridge verdict entry, countersealed to discretionary right account." Cordelia nodded to the warden with the chest. "Open record copies." Burned directive pages were spread on the lower step, followed by Torrin's certified transcriptions bearing triple marks and witness signatures from the gatehouse hall. The bound courier was forced to his knees beside them. "Name and post," Isra snapped. He swallowed. "Hadric, Silvermane Inner Courier." "Who ordered ash disposal?" He stared at Cain. Cain stared back, promise and threat in equal measure. Cordelia crouched until her eyes were level with the courier's. "You can keep his secrets and die for them," she said quietly, the whole hall straining to hear. "Or you can tell truth and live to see another winter under witness protection. Choose which alpha you believe can still enforce anything by dawn." Hadric broke first. Cain ordered burn sequence. Elder seal copied in inner office. Write notes genuine. Tribunal terms forged. The hall detonated into shouts. Maven recoiled as if struck. Cain stepped down from the dais, aura flaring hard enough to press against skin. "Liar!" he snarled, and lunged for the courier with claws half-shifted. Cordelia moved faster than anyone expected. She stepped onto the central sigil she had sabotaged days earlier, drew the cleaning blade from her sleeve, and sliced her palm in one decisive stroke. Blood hit carved stone. The dormant lattice answered like a struck bell. Silver fire raced through the aisle knots she had left unfinished, then arced up in a ring around the circle, high as a man's chest. Gasps tore through the balconies as moonfire wards sealed the dais and trapped Cain inside with her. Wulfric hit the barrier and rebounded, snarling, "Cordelia!" "I know the pattern," she said through clenched teeth, pressing her bleeding hand to the glyph line. Hold the perimeter. Pain lanced up her arm as the ward drank from her and stabilized. Cain slammed into the silver ring. Chains of light snapped around his legs and jerked tight. He roared, partially shifted, fur rippling along his forearms, fangs bared. You were brought here to scrub my floor, he spat. Cordelia stood straighter despite the tremor in her knees. I learned every crack in your house so I could split it. She drove her palm harder into the sigil and spoke the old revocation phrase her mother had once taught as theory, never expecting she would use it in blood and fire. By witness, by moon, by abuse of oath, I petition stripping of alpha authority. 3 balcony leaders rose and echoed, witnessed. Maven, shaking, whispered, witnessed. The ward brightened. Cain howled and tore one leg free, skin smoking where light clung. He charged, not at her throat, but lower, aiming straight for her abdomen. Wulfric did not wait for permission this time. He shifted in motion, not full wolf, but enough that power surged through muscle and bone, amber flooding his eyes as he drove through the weakening edge of the ward and met Cain mid-stride. They collided with a crack that shook dust from the beams. Claws, elbows, shoulder checks, controlled brutality. Cain fought like a cornered tyrant, wild and heavy. Wulfric fought like a king who had run out of reasons to hide. Cordelia kept the sigil alive, teeth gritted, directing constriction each time Cain tried to break away. Left flank, she shouted. Now knee. Wulfric pivoted on her call, slammed Cain's damaged leg and forced him down to one knee inside the burning chain arc. Cain swung upward with a hidden blade from his bracer. Wulfric caught his wrist, twisted until metal clattered across a stone, then drove him backward onto the center mark. Cain coughed, glaring up at Cordelia with naked hatred. You think they will follow a scrub woman and a ghost king. Cordelia stepped to the edge of the glowing line, blood still dripping from her palm. They will follow law if law has teeth. Cain gathered himself for one final surge, muscles bunching against the light chains. Wulfric ended it cleanly. One decisive strike across the throat line with ceremonial blade turned practical. One breath, one stillness afterward. No flourish, no second blow. Silence spread outward from the circle, vast and stunned. Then, from the east balcony, an alpha dropped to one knee. Another followed. Then a third. Isra raised her voice into the hush. Cain Silvermane is dead under witness challenge. Authority void. Moon law stands. Cordelia swayed as the ward flickered. Wulfric was at her side in an instant, catching her without lifting her off her feet, supporting rather than claiming. He looked at her bloodied hand, then at the assembled packs. Record this exactly, he said, voice carrying to the rafters. Cordelia Ironhold initiated lawful challenge, produced evidentiary chain, activated witness ward, and secured revocation. Let no scribe erase her authorship. Torin, crying openly now, pressed stylus to wax. Recorded. Cordelia drew one shaking breath, then another, while moonfire dimmed to silver embers beneath her boots, and the keep that had caged her learned her name as law. Wulfric kept one arm around her waist, careful of her balance, his other hand braced beneath her bleeding palm to stop the worst of the drip onto the sigil. His chest rose hard with spent fury. Cain's body lay still at the center mark, already ringed by wardens awaiting formal removal. No one moved to leave. The packs watched with the stunned concentration of wolves who knew they were standing inside a hinge moment, and Cordelia understood the next decision would become precedent as surely as the revocation had. If she walked away unclaimed, rival houses would argue her testimony had been opportunistic leverage. If he claimed without consent, everything she had fought for would curdle into another version of coercion. Wulfric turned to face her fully inside the fading ring. His voice carried, rough and unhidden. Cordelia Ironhold, in witness of moon law and crown law, I ask, not command. Do you consent to my mark as your mate? The question landed through the hall like struck steel. Pain pulsed from her sliced palm up to her shoulder, but a steadier pulse answered beneath it, the bond's low rhythm syncing with his. She looked at him, at the blood on his knuckles, the restraint still visible in every line of his body, and then at the balconies where power had always spoken over women like her. I am here. I am still here. My body hurts, my hand burns, and the child shifts under my ribs like a small insistence that life keeps moving even on nights built for endings. If I say yes, it is not surrender. It is choice made in full light, with witnesses, with law in my own mouth. He asked. He waited. He let me set the terms when every older story says an alpha takes first and explains later. I can feel how badly he wants to hold me, claim me, lock me behind his ribs and never risk this again. And still he is waiting. I choose this. Not because fate cornered me, because he kept earning the right to be chosen. Yes, she said, clear enough for the scribes. I consent. A visible release moved through him, not triumph, relief so deep it almost broke him. He cupped her face with a blood-streaked hand, thumb brushing her cheekbone once in silent reverence. Then hear me, he said, eyes fixed on hers. Mine, if you want me. Yours, as long as I draw breath. Mate, without condition. Her throat tightened. Mine, yours. Mate. He bent, paused one last fraction from her neck, and waited again. She nodded. Wulfric placed the ceremonial bite at the junction of her neck and shoulder with precise control, fangs breaking skin in a sharp white flare that stole her breath. For one heartbeat it was only pain, clean and bright. Then warmth surged outward from the mark in expanding waves. Not fever, not fire. Something richer and older, like winter-thick ice cracking to reveal a river in full current beneath. The ache in her wrists eased. The trembling in her legs settled. Panic she had carried for months loosened its grip behind her ribs and spilled away in a shaken exhale. The hall's scent map changed at once as their bond sealed into the air. Storm rain and cedar braided with her own wild mint and iron signature until even distant balconies could register the shift. Wulfric pulled back, lips at her temple, breathing hard. Too much? No, she whispered, dizzy with relief. Not too much. He started to step away for formal acknowledgement. Cordelia caught his forearm. Gasps rippled when she drew him down by the front of his tunic, turned his wrist to expose the pulse line beneath his jaw, and bared her own teeth. Her bite landed over his pulse, deliberate and sure, enough to mark and seal reciprocity. A low sound tore from him, half shock, half devotion, as the claim took. Gold runes along his forearms flared bright under his skin. For Cordelia, the sensation inverted, a brief sting at her mouth, then a rushing flood through the bond that carried impressions faster than thought. Wulfric kneeling in spilled wine so she would not. Wulfric at the chapel door with a blade across his knees. Wulfric in a soldier's cloak swallowing his crown to survive betrayal. Underneath all of it, unwavering. Protect, protect, protect. She felt his answering intake of her own memories, chains, accusations, the cold of being named unclean in public, and then his fierce refusal of that verdict as if he could bite through time itself. She released him slowly. Their foreheads touched, both of them shaking. No more exile, she whispered against his skin. No more hiding, he answered. Together, breath mingling, they finished, no more alone. When they separated, the bond sat between them like a newly forged bridge, settled and undeniable. Not a leash. A line of mutual recognition that steadied rather than bound. Isra dropped to one knee first, fist to heart. Luna Cordelia, she said, voice ringing clear, by witnessed bond and moonlaw authority. Torin followed, weeping openly, stylus tucked behind one ear. recorded and sealed. Around the hall, one by one, the visiting alphas and their seconds knelt or bowed according to their customs. Even Elder Maven, pale and shaking, lowered her head and surrendered her council staff to the nearest neutral warden without being asked. By first light, the body had been removed, the stone circle scrubbed again, and the evidence arranged on the long tribunal table under triple guard. Cordelia stood beside Wulfric at the head while Torin read the complete record into fresh wax and ink. The surviving transport tablet, the ash pit directive fragments, the certified transcriptions, the forged summons with incorrect hook cuts, Hadric's confession under witness oath, and the list of attackers captured in the smoke assault. 2 confessed to switching the tablets. 1 led wardens to a cistern niche where both originals were recovered intact, wrapped in oilcloth bearing Cain's inner seal. "Item chain restored," Torin said, tapping each with trembling precision. "No evidentiary gaps." Wulfric turned to Hadric, now unbound but guarded. "You testified. You face sentencing for arson attempt and conspiracy. Under Moon Law Reform Clause, cooperation stands as mitigation, not erasure. Do you accept exile service under neutral command?" Hadric swallowed hard. "I accept." "Granted," Cordelia said before anyone else could fill the silence. "Work in the sanctuary quarter once established. You will repair what you helped weaponize." He bowed his head, stunned. Maven's reckoning followed in the same hall. She confessed to permitting her seal matrix to be copied in exchange for promises of council stability, and was stripped of adjudication authority before the gathered packs. No one defended her. The lieutenants who came under White Banner with smoke powder were sentenced to labor terms under Isra's border command, where every shift would be witnessed and logged. By the second night after the challenge, treaty leaders returned to the Bloodstone Hall for renewal under new terms. Cordelia wore deep gray threaded with silver, no jewels except the fresh mark at her shoulder, and the iron bracelet Isra had commissioned from melted shackle links. Wulfric stood at her right, crown finally visible, and did not speak over her once. She read the reforms herself. Abandoned wolves could petition cross-border review without pack retaliation. Unborn heirs were explicitly protected from ritual exploitation. Any sacrificial clause now required the witness's spoken consent before neutral captains. Each clause passed by voice vote, then by seal. When it ended, Wulfric offered her the Moon Law ledger. "Keeper's place," he said quietly. She took it, hand steady. "Co-ruler," she corrected, and his smile was immediate and fierce. That afternoon they crossed the old servant barracks together. The room still smelled of lye and damp straw. Cordelia opened shutters one by one until sunlight reached every corner. Isra brought blankets from border stores. Torin arrived with a cart of writing slates and muttered that proper intake records prevented half of history's abuses. 3 cast-off females from neighboring territories entered at dusk, wary and thin. Cordelia met them at the threshold herself, showed them bunks with clean wool, and said the words she had once needed to hear. "You are not cargo here." Later, when the keep finally quieted enough that boots no longer hammered every corridor, Cordelia stood on the upper balcony overlooking the pines, one hand spread over her belly as the child rolled beneath her palm. Moonlight pooled on the parapet stones. Behind her, the hall musicians played softly for the first time without tension coiled underneath. Wulfric came to her without ceremony and slid his fingers between hers. No audience now, no tribunal, no need to prove anything. He rested his forehead against her marked shoulder, careful and tender, breathing her in like a prayer answered late but whole. Below them, Silvermane Keep held steady in the night under new oaths, no longer a fortress of managed fear, but a home, being rebuilt room by room, record by record, choice by chosen choice. Cordelia laced her hand tighter with his and watched the realm settle into a peace sturdy enough to trust.